Luke 17:28, Jesus indicates that the passage describing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19 foreshadows the second coming of Christ. In Luke, Jesus says, likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built, but on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So Jesus is telling us that the story of Lot is going to be very similar to the future event when the second coming occurs. In Genesis 19, the first two verses, Lot symbolically represents the body of Christ at the time immediately before the second coming. Lot is a righteous man, so to some extent he is the pattern for all righteous men. So Lot treated the strangers, which were actually angels, as if they were the Lord. So when Lot sees them, he says, my lords, turn aside, I pray you, to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. So that's a little bit different than just somebody who's just looking at people who are, they don't know. So he treats them very well. And offering strangers a place to stay and wash up, that's similar to what happens today at many Christian homeless shelters. So people have a place to go and a place sometimes to spend the night. Well, that's what Lot's offering. It's the same. So we see with the pattern of Lot, not only is he a righteous man, but the actions he's taking prefigure the actions of Christians inside the Christian church. In the next verse, in Genesis 19:3, Lot's going to strongly urge the men to turn aside, just as Christians strongly urge everyone to turn to the Lord. They're saying that they're willing to stay in the street, and he wants them to go with him and enter the house. Now the house is going to represent the church, or if you will, the house of a righteous man. Either way, he's going to either take them home, or the church is going to take them in and put them up for the night. It says he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So we have the baking of bread, which is going to be, or the unleavened bread, which is going to be similar to the Last Supper. So one of the things with Christianity that we're always mindful of is, are we bringing people to Christ? And he's wanting them to turn aside. That represents the turn of conversion, if you will. And they entering the house, very much like people entering the church. And once again, we see the bread like the Last Supper. So this all prefigures righteous men bringing people to Christ. So Lot's going to represent that, just like we see in the church. Now in the next two verses, Genesis 19:4 through 5, says that all the men of the city walked down to the streets of the city, to Lot's house, and demand that they be allowed to know other men. When all the people of a city walk down the streets, that's like a parade or a demonstration. We're not talking some of the people. He's talking everybody. So when Moses wrote this, either that's hyperbole, or he's talking about literally everybody coming out and going down to Lot's house. Well, that sounds like a parade or a demonstration or a protest march or something like that. And that's what we're going to see here. Now, right now we have gay pride parades and demonstrations throughout the streets of the major cities demanding that men be allowed the right to know other men. So, the time of Lot, with this group of men who are going to demand their right to know other men, and then going down the street to the house, if you will, of Lot, well, we see that now. We didn't see this 100 years ago. It didn't exist. So this is new. Gay pride parades are a new phenomena. Now, in Genesis 19:6-9, Lot's going to represent the members of the church that go out into the streets and engage in dialogue with those in the gay pride parades. So notice that Lot calls them brothers. And even though he believes their actions are wicked, he treats people with other views with courtesy. Lot's two daughters represent the Old Testament and New Testament churches, if you will, the Jewish Christian and the Gentile Christian churches. And those churches are offered to all that want to know God. So Lot offering his daughters is the same as Christ offering his, if you will, his daughters the church that he founded. And he offers them to anybody. There's nobody who's precluded to going to the church. That's part of the outreach. That's part of the purpose. And in this, Lot does not preclude anyone. So we have the same thing here. The people who haven't turned sometimes are judgmental. And in this particular case, that's what's going on here. These individuals don't want Lot to be their judge. Well, nobody does. And Lot's not saying he's their judge. He's told them his opinion of how he feels about things. It doesn't mean that they can't feel differently. He's not mandating that they have to do what he said. On the other hand, the men of the city are demanding that Lot has to do what they say. So they want to be the judge. And that's what we see going on today. We see that the gay pride parades have kind of taken a change. And the LGBTQ movement, they now indicate that they will deal harshly with those that try to get them to change or talk to them about what they're doing. Once again, there's nobody in the church who's demanding that saying that, I'm your judge and that you have to do this. They're simply saying that we think that there's a better way. This isn't different than somebody who smokes cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes. If I see somebody who smokes cigarettes, at some point, I typically talk to them about the fact that, especially if they're my friend and I don't want anything to happen to them, I talk to them about why I think that smoking cigarettes is bad. They don't necessarily have to agree with me. So I tell them my view. They're free to go do whatever it is they want. But I'm also free to express my viewpoint and my opinion, which is what Lot is doing. And he's talking about the fact that, he thinks that this is not good, what they're wanting to do. There's nothing wrong with indicating that you have an opinion and you think that something that somebody is doing is really not healthy or helpful for them, and you want them to have something better. You want them to have a better life. We now see that what was being represented in the story of Lot, we now see that happening. We didn't see it before. Before there weren't any, if you will, lawsuits directed at individuals or at churches. We didn't necessarily see any violence directed at individuals or churches. We didn't see that. So there has been a change. And according to the story, according to Christ, if this is similar to, if Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be similar to the second coming, well, we're right on the precipice. Now, inside of this, Lot's house is going to represent either the actual physical church buildings, or once again the houses of the people who attend church. And we see in some cases where violence is perpetrated on those individuals. In some cases, the violence is in the form of protests. You see things being painted. There has been one church bombing that was blown up with an improvised explosive device. We've also seen people punched who were not doing anything physical, where they were attacked. Like I said, this is a change. At this point, it says that the men, the angels, put forth their hands and they brought Lot into the house. And they shut the door. Those verses 10 and 11 in chapter 19 of Genesis, they indicate a power struggle concerning whether or not those parading through the streets will be allowed to legally take their case even inside of the church to silence their opposition. All right, so the LGBTQ movement, in some cases, some of the individuals there and some of the organizers in that movement are trying to silence anyone who speaks an opinion different. Now, why would we speak a different opinion? Well, like I said, with a cigarette smoker, okay, you like smoking cigarettes and you're entertained by that. That doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about your welfare. And as your neighbor, your friend, your fellow countryman, or even just an acquaintance, I'm going to go talk to you about that because I think that it's harmful. Well, it's the same thing here. Genesis 19:11 seems to indicate that the activists will not be able to find a way to take their case into the houses of worship. At least in the United States, we have the Bill of Rights. Other nations have similar types of statutes, which indicates that if you're trying to take opinions or silence opinions inside of a house of worship, you're kind of swimming upstream. That is the place where opinions are discussed. That's the concept behind sermons. And it is the concept behind most houses of worship, that people do discuss things. That doesn't mean that they're always going to act and behave the way they are or hold those opinions. That's part of the idea of having a discussion. So they have discussions about concepts, and then they talk about, how they should do things and what they should do, and also how they should interact with other people. So part of this is, as far as interacting with other people, if you're really somebody's neighbor and you see that they're doing something that you believe is harmful or not beneficial to them, if you really are concerned about that person, you're going to mention it to them. The fact that they don't want it mentioned, okay, they give you their feedback and then you move on. I don't see where that should be criminalized, but according to the story of Lot, that's kind of what's going on here, and that's what we see today. They do genuinely feel that what they're doing should be okay, and they want to continue doing that practice. On the other hand, they are somewhat potentially blind to the hazards of the situation. Now, that's not any different than anybody else who engages in behavior they want to engage in. I'll put an example here that was eye-opening for me. There was a lady I worked with, and her son made the football team. And she was kind of concerned about it, but her husband said, "Don't worry about it." So she went to go see her son's first football game, and she drove from work to the game. Her husband was already there, and when she got there at the game, she saw an ambulance at the stadium. So she went running in. She was concerned that her son was hurt. So she went running in and found her husband in the stands, and she goes, she asked if her son was all right, and he goes, well, yeah, he's okay. Why do you think that he's hurt? And she goes, I saw an ambulance right there at the stadium. Did somebody get hurt? And he goes, no, nobody was hurt. They always have an ambulance at the stadiums when they play football because it's so likely for somebody to get hurt. Now think about it. If you're playing a game where it's so likely that somebody's going to get hurt, is that really something you really want to get involved in? Well, a lot of people do. Okay? And they, if you will, want to overlook the hazards of the sport, as is true in a lot of sports and in a lot of recreational activities. A lot of times there are hazards. And one of the things we have to look at is this dangerous, and should we be doing it? And is this something that's beneficial for our life, or is it just some form of entertainment? We're being entertained, but the risks are extremely high, and what could happen to us is very dangerous. So for all you football fans out there, I will quote one of the early church leaders. They had stuff where people used to have physical contact in the Colosseums. Well, we go to Colosseums today, and this early church leader pointed out, he goes, and he was watching a boxing match, and he was at a Colosseum, and he goes, Christians are, we're told to turn the other cheek. And he goes, here we have a sport where people are physically having to punch each other in the face. He goes, is this really an activity that Christians should be involved with? Well, some Christians say yes. Others would say no. But we have those discussions in the churches, and we have those discussions a lot of times in sermons, and we have them in our Bible study classes, and we have them with each other. All right? At no point is anybody trying to bring criminal charges against people for talking about whether or not boxing should be a sport that should be allowed. So are we going to throw people in jail because of that? Are we going to take their houses? Are we going to launch criminal lawsuits for that kind of comment? How about for people who aren't big on football because of the fact it is a dangerous sport, and people, not only do they get hurt, they carry those injuries for the rest of their lives. It's lots of damage to people's knees. That's very common. Also a lot of broken teeth, especially for linemen. Right? So it's a very physical sport. It is dangerous. So are we going to put people in jail? We're going to have judges tell people that you can't talk about the hazards of football, you can't talk about the hazards of boxing, you can't talk about the hazards of whitewater rafting, of parachuting. There's all sorts of entertainment activities or recreational activities that people take part in. So, and if you will, romantic activities are a lot of times a form of entertainment. They're a very high form of adult entertainment. But for some reason or another, the courts are now wanting to take this as we're going to criminalize discussions over this. But we're not going to criminalize discussions over other dangerous types of entertainment activities. Well, that doesn't really make sense. But it does in a way. It is fulfilling the prophecy that Jesus is saying that this passage in Genesis is prophetic. It has prophetic foreshadowing inside of it. It is following a pattern. So yes, it is going to happen. It's been foretold. And it's not something that should be happening. We shouldn't be criminalizing discussions, and I do mean that as discussions, especially inside the church where this is being discussed either with sermons or just with if you will, when the congregation is together, and they're talking about issues and ways that they can live a better life. According to the story of Lot, that this is going to be a problem with the LGBT community. And when you see this being a problem, and that they're going to now start attacking, physically attacking, both the houses and the people themselves who live in those houses who are talking to them about this, that this is a sign of the end. Because this doesn't make any sense. That I can talk to somebody about football being dangerous, I can talk to somebody about whitewater rafting being dangerous, I can talk to somebody about drunk driving being dangerous, I can talk to somebody about smoking cigarettes as being dangerous, but I can't talk to somebody about certain sexual activities as being dangerous. In Genesis 19:12 through 14, the angels tell Lot, hey, do you have any other people here? Okay, anybody else you're associated, anyone in the city, you need to bring them out of this place, or we're going to destroy this place. All right. Now, at this point, they're saying, anybody loosely associated with him, these are people who aren't necessarily living, in his house. So we have that in the church, that there are all sorts of people who are somewhat associated with the church or affiliated, or, that are, have similar concepts. In this particular case, sons-in-law are going to stand for those who are with a similar faith, but only from a law standpoint. They follow ritualistic practices. They just simply go through, they show up and they go through the ceremonial practices, but in fact, they don't have any real interest in the faith beyond that. Throughout the writings of Moses, the in-laws typically represent the what we would consider to be the Old Testament type of church, which more or less followed the Mosaic law. So in-law means that they're only associated through the law, that they aren't part of the bride, so they aren't part of the marriage, if you will. They're only associated through the law with the marriage of Christ to his bride, the church. So, and we're going to see it here. We're going to see it in the story of Jacob. We're going to see it in other instances inside of the writings of Moses, where in-laws are going to represent those who basically are associated with the church by they follow the law or the ceremonial practices. Now, these people a lot of times, they don't really, sometimes they do feel that is a way to atonement, that they are participating, but they really don't believe in so a lot of them don't believe in an actual apocalypse or judgment. They like being associated with the group, but they don't really believe that hell is going to occur, that the world is going to be destroyed, or there's anything that they need to be concerned about. Some of them don't believe that that anybody will be cast into the lake of fire, or there will be any form of eternal punishment. They have some curious beliefs on those things. But in any case, and a lot of times they believe that the fire and brimstone sermons are, they feel they're a joke. Okay? And they will, a lot of times outside of church, they will laugh about it. So that's what's being represented here. Lot's sons-in-laws think this is a joke. In Genesis chapter 19, 15 through 16, the angels being present when Lot woke up at daybreak is a reference to the presence of the angels at the daybreak resurrection of Jesus. The hesitation by Lot after he wakes up at daybreak, so the angels are saying, let's go. Well, it says Lot hesitates. Well, that period of hesitation represents the time period between when Jesus was resurrected and when he's going to return. Okay? So that's the hesitation. So we are in the era of hesitation, if you will. So we are waiting for Christ to take the next action. Now, it says, the angels taking everyone with Lot by the hand and leading them to safety, that represents the rapture, when everyone who's with Jesus will be taken by the angels to safety. And we see that in Matthew chapter 24, verses 30 through 31. And it says, and he will, and I'll hit verse 31, and he will send out his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So we see this here, where the angels are physically taking people by the hand. That's the reason it's saying we've got this amount of detail. One thing to remember here in the story of Lot, this event happened hundreds of years before Moses lived. For him to have this detail, he had to have gotten this information from somebody else. He did not personally witness this, nor did anybody that he talked to who was alive during his day, did they witness it. So Moses, to get this information, either it was handed down, or more likely he was told this by God. So when he was preparing Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, we're told that Moses was out in a tent, okay, that he used to meet out there with the angel of the Lord. So my guess is that there was a discussion. We also know that he had communication with God. So at some point, there's a good chance that this information came directly to him from God, and God wanted him to write this down in this manner so it would reflect perfectly what was going to happen at the end time. So we have a foreshadowing of the rapture. Now in Genesis 19, verses 17 through 23, the flight of the family of Lot to the little city, that represents the flight of the Christians in Judea in 70 AD, fleeing to the little city of Pella immediately before the destruction by the Romans under Titus. Okay, you may or may not recall in the Gospels, Jesus gives the warning in Luke 21:21. It says, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. That when the city of Jerusalem was surrounded, okay, then everybody was supposed to flee. Well, what actually happened was, Jesus told them to flee to the mountains, but we know through church history, and we also know through another party, Josephus, I believe, mentions it, but I know that Epiphanius, who was a church historian, he lived in about 400 AD, and also Eusebius, who was a church historian, and he lived in around 325 AD. Both of these individuals tell us that, in fact, the Christians went to the city of Pella, a small city. Said that they did not go to the mountain. Instead, they went to a small city named Pella. And that's exactly what we see here in Lot. Lot is being told you need to go to the mountains. The Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be destroyed. But instead, he asked if he can go to a city, a small city. Well, that's exactly what the early Christians did in 70 AD. And we're told, and I'm going to read this from Epiphanius, and this was written about 400 AD. It says, for when the city Jerusalem was about to be taken and destroyed by the Romans, it was revealed in advance to all the disciples by an angel of God that they should remove from the city as it was going to be completely destroyed. So they sojourned as immigrants in Pella, the city that's in Transjordan, and it's said to be a city of the Decapolis. So it was on the other side of the Jordan River from the city of Jerusalem, and it's actually somewhat, let me get my bearings correct. It is northeast of Jerusalem, and they went to that city, and despite the fact that the Romans were conquering Judea and areas of Israel, and they actually destroyed several cities of the Decapolis, they did not destroy that city. The city of Pella survived, and the Christians were unharmed. Just as we see in the story here of Lot. There were actually, I think it was like 4 cities that were destroyed, and Zoar, which was the little city, it was saved. So there were a lot of cities that were destroyed here along with Sodom and Gomorrah. And like I said, I think believe there's like 4. We see something similar to that happen with the Roman conquest of the land of Israel. And we see not only Jerusalem being conquered and destroyed, but lots of other cities being destroyed. For instance, Gerasa was destroyed, and they were part of the Decapolis. But Pella was not. So this is almost an exact match of what we see with Lot. And so underneath Epiphanius, what he said happened, where the Christians were warned by an angel, and then they ended up going to a little city, and then that city was not harmed. We see the same thing here with Lot. He's being warned by the angels, and then he goes and he stays in a small city, and that was not destroyed. So, now, will that happen again when we get close to the second coming? Maybe there'll be a double prefigurement, but I will tell you that, in my opinion, that section of Genesis 19 has already been fulfilled. In Genesis chapter 19, 24 through 25, that parallels Peter's depiction of the destruction of the world by fire. All right? So Peter says that the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with fire. Now. He goes on and further, and he says, since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness? He says, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by fire, and the elements will melt with intense heat. Well, that's kind of what we see here with Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed by fire from heaven. In the next verse it says, but Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, according to Irenaeus, and I'm going to quote him, he says, here's what he says that Lot represents. He says that Lot's wife remained in the territory of Sodom, no longer corruptible flesh, but a pillar of salt, which endures forever. And by those natural processes which appertain to the human race, indicating that the church also, which is the salt of the earth, per Matthew 5:13, has been left behind within the confines of the earth and subject to human sufferings. And while entire members are often taken away from it, the pillar of salt still endures, thus typifying the foundation of the faith which makes strong and sends forward children to their father. Genesis 19, 27 through 28. That parallels the depiction of the last judgment in Revelation. Abraham represents the resurrection of the friends of God who will return and stand before the Lord at the last judgment. It says, early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to return and stand before the Lord. Wow. So all those who are resurrected. Now, says that Abraham looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, and he saw the smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. Well, that's what's kind of going to happen here according to Revelation. In Revelation 20, verses 12 through 14, is that ultimately there is going to be a lake of fire, and the people at the last judgment are going to see this lake of fire. They will be able to see it off in the distance. In Genesis 19:29, so this is the next piece, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah represents destruction of the world by fire. Abraham represents the friends of God who have already fallen asleep, who will be remembered and resurrected. Lot represents the righteous who are still alive at the end, who will be raptured out of the catastrophe. Genesis 19:30 through 38. According to the early church leader Irenaeus, the two daughters of Lot represent the Jewish church and the Gentile Christian churches. The two churches produce from their own father the two churches, they produce from their own father living sons to the living God. Now, he gives the entire proof for what he's got, and I've got the thing listed in the book. And essentially, what you have to think of with the church is that Jesus, he's the founder of the church, which makes him the father of the church. But the church is also his bride. And that's true of both the Jewish Christian church and the Gentile Christian church. So Jesus has founded them both, but they are also to be his bride. Well, Lot's daughters represent that relationship between the churches and the Messiah. And Irenaeus also points out the fact that this was you have to keep in mind that this is an allegory, if you will. That's part of what is going on here. That inside of this, we're going to have information that's going to foreshadow events in the future. So that's why we're told this information. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is these two daughters of Lot. And Irenaeus points this out. They thought that Lot and them were the only ones left alive. They thought everybody else on the planet was dead. So they're thinking the human race is going to die with them. So they do this so that the human race will live. Well, that's exactly what happens with the churches. When the world is destroyed by fire, at the second coming, in the apocalypse, the only way that the only part of the human race that's going to continue is going to be in the Jewish Christian and the Gentile Christian churches, the two churches that were founded by Jesus and are also the bride of Christ. Okay, so that is the only way that we will continue as a race. For everybody else will be gone. That will be the only part of the race that's left.